Why are so many stories about teenagers? As a teenager myself, it's a question I've never really had to think about, primarily because it never crossed my mind. It's always been natural, in my opinion, for the protagonist of a narrative to be in my age group. Why? Who knows and who cares? It can't be because of the way teenagers act. The kids in these stories usually act like adults anyway, and even with teenage protagonists, the story doesn't always take place in an academic setting, so it can't be that either. The younger audience of most action-oriented narratives is a pretty natural response as well. It's the same reason Ash Ketchum has been 10 years old since the 90s. Kids don't want to watch adults running around playing with pocket monsters, so it's only natural that we make some immortal 10-year-old do it. But outside of Pokemon, some of these stories deal with some pretty heavy shit that would really only catch the attention of someone older, so it's unlikely that it's purely to appeal to a younger audience. Whatever the reason is, you'd be hard-pressed to find an anime protagonist in the modern day that has hair on his face, let alone is above the age of 18, and I find that really interesting. So in this video, we'll go over some of the most popular reasons as to why this is, and hopefully learn a bit more about actually writing these characters as a result. Though the real answer to this question is probably pretty obvious by now, if you want to be boring. Audiences simply prefer teenage protagonists, for some reason. A teenager in a modern day anime is like a blank canvas. You can do pretty much anything you want with them as long as it doesn't involve bodily fluids. And because of this, audiences are generally enamored by stories involving teenage protagonists, particularly in the slice of life genre. Haganai is a series that features everything that you want to see in a slice of life narrative. An unnecessary amount of sexual references and a character of questionable gender that I'm pretty sure is a child, just one of many things this series has in common with Persona. Haganai follows Kodaka Hasegawa, a teenage boy with blonde hair and no friends, as he, along with Yozara Mikazuki, create the Neighbors Club, a group dedicated to helping people with no friends become friends with each other. The reason I'm bringing up Haganai is because, in some ways, I feel like it holds the key to understanding what makes teenage protagonists so interesting: their relatability. Everybody can remember that high school or middle school friend group, that sense of camaraderie between everyone and how every day you spent with them felt like a gift. Or, on the flip side, the sense of isolation that came with lacking a friend group like that. Wanting nothing more than to share your best moments with another person, your greatest achievements with other people, and asking yourself time and time again if you were the problem the whole time. Haganai captures this sense of youthful connection in a way that a narrative driven by adults could never hope to capture. There's a love and a growing bond between the neighborhood club that you can see develop as the series goes on. And in spite of all of the animeisms I mentioned earlier, Haganai eventually grows into a heartfelt narrative where these people manage to fill that hole in their hearts with one another by the end, primarily because they're the ones that open their hearts to one another in the first place, in a way only a carefree teenager such as our protagonists could. Whether this is because of the growth of the main characters as people or not is debatable, but one thing is for certain. When it comes to narratives revolving around teenage protagonists, one thing they seem to do better than most, the best if you will, is development. The producer of the Persona series, Kazuhisa Wada, was recently asked in an interview at CDEC why the series protagonists were generally teenagers and not adults like some other video game franchises. It's an interesting question, and the interview itself is what planted the seed in my mind to make this video in the first place. In his response, Wada said that the primary reason Persona chooses to follow teenage protagonists is because the Persona games are meant to reflect the theme of growing up, and using teenagers is the best way to convey that concept. In other words, teenagers are easier to develop, and I can't really disagree with that. As a teenager myself, I'm obviously less emotionally developed than many of the adults in my life, and I'd imagine it'd be easier to write me as a character if I was to be a fictional person, if I wasn't real, I guess. Developing teenagers is like an open door. There's so many angles you can attack it from, so many implications that come with even the slightest of actions. I wasn't lying when I said teenagers were like a blank canvas, and this is something that many writers, whether consciously or not, have embraced. Adults are hard to write because stories need emotional characters to be striking and memorable, and adults tend to suppress their emotions on purpose as to avoid vulnerability. Cowboy Bebop makes good use of this knowledge, using the thin emotional veil between the characters as a plot device to stoke tension and make the moments where the veil slips that much more impactful. But such a process requires finesse, and developing characters like Spike, Faye, and Jet can be impossible to do right without the right amount of experience. That's exactly why many writers prefer to cut out the middleman and just write stories about emotional teenagers outright, causing a steep influx of emotional narratives with proportionally younger protagonists. There's a reason even Naruto stopped reminiscing about how lonely he used to be in Boruto. A grown-ass man simply doesn't have the time or space to sit around moping about elementary school bullies. But even with this knowledge, that doesn't fully explain the audience's attraction to these characters. Such emotionally flexible entities are bound to get annoying, and looking at it objectively, the traits that make these teenage characters so remarkable in the first place aren't really their youthful traits, but the ways they manage to show their maturity in spite of those things. But that's exactly it. This isn't an objective discussion. When viewing these stories and identifying with these characters, an adult audience watching stories about these teenage protagonists aren't thinking about the emotional clarity of these characters, but instead looking at it from a perspective of nostalgia. What's a better way to follow a whole section about emotions than with one of the saddest anime in the world, am I right? Anohana, the flower we saw that day, is a narrative about friendship, childhood, grief, and nostalgia. Following the story of Jinta Yadalmi, Anohana has a plot that I barely have the heart to get into in this video. Instead, I'll use it as an excuse to talk about the real point of this section, the past. Your past as a person. I'm technically still a child, so I can't speak much about nostalgia or whatever, but you're most likely not. And if you are, then just pretend for a minute that you're not so you can understand what I'm saying. Anohana is a series that follows Jinta as he attempts to reunite his old friend group after their previous failure to cope with the death of their childhood friend, Meiko Honma, otherwise known as Menma. Anohana captures this sense of nostalgia perfectly. Through life, we change and shift as people. The people we would spend time with almost religiously drift away from us, and before we know it, we're all stuck in our own little corners of life, waiting for the jaws of adulthood to snatch us up and make us work 9 to 5s like the good little humans we are. Before Anohana is a story about coping with the loss of a loved one, it's a story about fighting that death grip while you still have time to, about pushing to make time for the ones in your life that you care about, and about forgiving yourself for the mistakes you made in the past to move forward into the future. But what does any of this have to do with teenagers? Well, I said it earlier. The time you have left. The youth you have left to waste doing nothing productive and waiting to become an adult so you can be mildly productive and still do nothing for yourself. Anohana rejects the idea that life begins when you're an adult or ends when you stop being a child, but it promotes the idea that life goes on despite our regrets, and our growth can be a lifelong commitment rather than something we give up on because we believe it's over when our lives have barely begun. And this is the reason why so many stories are about teenagers. That potential to change the worst aspects of your life, to make a difference in the world, and to stand out as someone important as early as possible. When you get older, you feel the color drain from your life, but only when you're a teenager do you truly have control over how much color there is. Stories like Anohana embrace this mentality by giving the characters the chance to make better for themselves in spite of themselves, something that a narrative revolving around adults would struggle to do. And it's because of this that the youth of Anohana and narratives like it have and always will continue to capture the hearts of people for years to come. To be young is to be high on life, a feeling that most are afraid to forget. My name is John Sage, and thanks for watching. Hello guys, it is Editing Room John here once more at 12 in the morning, just minutes before this video is releasing to you all. I was not expecting this video to be such an ordeal to make, but part of me is happy that it was. This new step that I'm taking with my content in the big 2025 is something that I feel like my channel has needed for a very long time. A step in a direction that is truer to myself and my vision as an artist and creator. As well as giving me the ability to make content that I feel like you would all enjoy, not just because it is personal to me, but because it is relatable to all of you. This video, in quality, may not be the best, but I do believe I've made something that a lot of you will and can enjoy, and I can only hope that I have succeeded to your guys' expectations. I'm not going to make this section long at all, even though a minute probably is long for something like this, but I would like to thank you all for being here, and I would like to ask you all to continue being here with me as I continue to pursue my dreams and to make my art. My name is John Sage, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of your night. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.